Hi and welcome. I'm Elizabeth Cush. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor, licensed in Maryland and Delaware. And today we are going to talk about women, anxiety, and mindfulness. So, a little about me. As I said, I'm a licensed therapist, and I am also a soul support for highly sensitive women. So I do some life coaching, group work through my Elizabeth Cush coaching side of my business. I am a mother of 3 adult children, and I live in Delaware, but spent a lot of my time in Maryland and was born and raised in Philadelphia. The thing that got me the thing that got me excited or interested in becoming a therapist was having my children. Because of my own upbringing, I knew that I wanted to be a different kind of mom. I knew that I wanted to be raising my kids with more insight and sort of psychological know-how, and that got me on the journey of learning about psychology, child psychology in particular, and really sparked my interest to become a therapist. So I'm a late bloomer. I started my college experience back in my 20s and did not complete my master's until 53. So, in between those times of being a college student, being employed in many different areas throughout my life, raising my children, and then going back to college in my 40s, completing my master's at 53, a lot of life transpired. And I think that life experience has helped me be a better therapist and better human. So I bring all of that to the work that I do, and currently live with my husband and our dachshund, who is a rescue, and his name is Elvis. So, your learning objectives for this training are to describe why the ACE study is so important in understanding the health and well being of your clients, to identify 3 factors that contribute to women developing an anxiety disorder, and to describe 3 mindfulness practices that can be incorporated into your therapy sessions. So, today we're going to talk about the prevalence of anxiety in women, why so many women struggle with anxiety, and give a little background of the prevalence of anxiety for women versus men, because twice as many women are diagnosed with an anxiety disorder as men. So 3.1% of women have a lifetime occurrence of agoraphobia compared to 1.7% of men. You can see this all on the slide. 7.7% of women had generalized anxiety disorder compared to men, who it was only 4.1%. These statistics all came from the anxiety disorder, not remembering the website, but I'll put that in the notes at the end of the presentation. But again, panic disorder, much greater percentage of women than men. Social anxiety disorder, 10.3% versus 8.7% for men. And then specific phobias, women have almost double the amount present with almost double the amount of women present with specific phobias. And then 8.5% of women have PTSD, a lifetime occurrence of PTSD. So obviously, even if men were reporting as much as women in terms of their anxiety levels, a huge percentage of women, as compared to men, struggle with anxiety in some form or another. So why? Why is that the case? Why are women, diagnosed twice as much? Why are women struggling more? Why is anxiety a deeper problem for women than it is for men? Part of it is biology. Okay, so Anxiety and Depression Association of America. That's where the statistics came from on the last slide. But so biology, apparently for women, our amygdala is more reactive than it is for men. And so the amygdala is a part of our brain that gets stimulated when when it gets stimulated can make us feel anxious. It's the fight, flight, freeze part of our brain in that response system. So if ours is more reactive, if women have a more reactive amygdala, it would make sense that maybe we would be more anxious. But there are also societal and cultural reasons for women being more anxious or being diagnosed more often with anxiety disorders. So some of those risk factors that we're showing here, that some of the mental health disorders that disproportionately impact women include gender-based violence, socioeconomic disadvantage, low income and income equality, low and subordinate social status and rank, and an unremitting responsibility for the care of others. So more often than not, women are responsible for the care of family, children, but as well elder family members as well. So that those burdens fall disproportionately on women as compared to men. Some other causes for women, as it said, gender-based violence in the last slide. Here we're going to talk more specifically about trauma. And these statistics come from the World Health Organization and the Bureau of Justice Statistics. Say that 3 times fast. Worldwide, 33% of women have experienced physical and or sexual violence in their lifetime. 35%. 30% of women in relationships reported that their partner physically or sexually abused them. And that statistic does not include verbal or mental abuse. So the number of women who have been abused, either emotionally, physically, or sexually in their relationships is actually greater than that 30% number represents. And women ages 12 and up are 138% more likely than men to be a victim of violent crime committed by a partner. 138% more likely than men. So that's a big percentage. And 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 20 boys is a victim of childhood sexual abuse. So these are some pretty sobering statistics. And I think that it really highlights why women may be more anxious, but also be diagnosed with an anxiety at a greater rate than men. So because trauma can live in our systems in very different ways. For some people, it shows up as anxiety disorders, other people, significant depression. But trauma, along with post-traumatic stress disorder, trauma, PTSD, anxiety disorder, depressions, it's all linked. So the fact that women are traumatized more often than men in general means that they're probably more likely to be more anxious. So I know that the ACEs study has been filtered out into the world for quite some time, but I'm not sure that everybody recognizes the impact of adverse childhood experiences on adulthood. And so the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Effects study, was a long-term study conducted by Kaiser Permanente and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And so it followed the volunteers over many years and found that the greater number of ACEs, so adverse childhood effects, the greater number of those ACEs a person experienced in their lifetime, the more likely they were to have developmental, physical, and mental health conditions. So they tracked this over years, over a large population. And other studies have shown that adverse events in childhood can lead to a rewiring of our brain's circuitry. That creates a state of chronic stress, and then that's really hard to disengage from that chronic stress and the brain to go back to a non-stress state. So if early on our home life or the experiences we were having created a high level of stress as a child, that is how a child learns to be in the world, that they live with that high level of chronic stress for years, which then impacts their physical health as well. So here are the 10 ACEs that were studied. I believe there were only 10, but I could be wrong about that. One is physical abuse. So if a child was hit, beaten, otherwise harmed, obviously that has a detrimental impact on them as a child. But it's shown, the idea of these ACE studies, the ACE studies, was that not only did it impact the child, it impacted the adult. So when that child became an adult, it impacted their mental well-being, their physical health, their developmental health, or their developmental state. Sexual abuse, when a child is touched, fondled in a sexual way, or is forced to participate in a sexual way, that impacts them in childhood as well as adulthood. Emotional abuse. So if a child is verbally abused, mistreated, or emotionally neglected, that impacts that child. That impacts the child, it impacts the adult later in life. Physical neglect, when a child's basic needs, not just the emotional neglect, but physical neglect, like food, clothing, shelter, or medical care. If those needs aren't met, once again, impacts the child, but also impacts the adult later in life. And here's emotional neglect. I didn't realize I had a separate topic for that, but there it is. If that child is not given the emotional support they need, again, impacts the child, impacts the adult later in life. So some other of the adverse childhood experiences or adverse childhood events, violence against the mother. So when a child's mother is abused, and even if the child isn't witnessing it, the fact that the mother is being abused impacts the mother's mental health, which then impacts the child. Parental divorce. Separation or divorce is considered an adverse event, which then impacts the child, impacts the adult. Substance abuse within a home. So if a member has abuses or uses alcohol or drugs, that impacts that child in the moment, but also the adult later in life. Mental illness, the same thing. When all the resources are either going to the substance user or the mental health, the person with mental illness, that can impact the child, impact that child when it's an adult. Or if a member of the household is incarcerated. So again, as difficult as these things are for children, the trauma, the adverse event stays with the child typically from childhood into adulthood. And the more adverse events a child experiences, the greater the percentage or the greater the likelihood is that they will have some impact later in life, whether it's physical illness or emotional and mental health illness. So to understand how these adverse events, how societal constrictions, cultural experiences impact anxiety, with childhood adverse events, the children learn to be on guard, to be ready for what's next when their childhood life feels disrupted, when they feel watchful, unsafe. It stimulates their amygdala. So that comes on board, it gets activated, and it can overwhelm your system. So if you live with that activated, overwhelmed amygdala from a very early age, it takes a lot to reset, to help us re-regulate. And if the kids that are experiencing these things are not getting the help that they need at an early age, that means we're seeing the adults who have come from those experiences. So part of our understanding is recognizing how those early childhood experiences impact them today, but also to help them learn how to regulate or re-regulate their nervous system. So in those anxious moments, the part of our brains that can help us regulate the body, soothe our fears, help us feel more flexible in our responses and feel emotionally balanced isn't communicating with the rest of our brain, with that very reactive part of our brain. So there is no sense of, oh yeah, I'm not in danger anymore, I'm okay. Your nervous system is saying nothing is safe. This is your clients. Nothing is safe. The world is not a safe place. I need to enter the world from a place of fear and guardedness and that fight-flight response. So it's hard to do anything other than be anxious because this is something that's been put into place since childhood. And so part of our work is to be able to understand where the anxiety is stemming from and then to help give our clients the tools to manage that anxiety, to re-regulate, to bring their nervous system back in balance. The good news is that with intentional work, we can help our clients bring their parasympathetic nervous system back online. We can help those clients re-regulate. We can help our clients better understand how that anxiety came to be in their system. One, that it's not their fault. Two, that there's a good reason for that anxiety to have developed. And three, maybe today they don't necessarily have to enter the world from that place, that maybe those parts of them that learned to be fearful and afraid early on in life and to feel like the world wasn't a safe place, maybe we can help all of our clients better understand that hopefully where they are today is a safer place, emotionally, physically, mental health-wise. That may not always be the case. If they're still living in an abusive relationship, that's a whole different thing. But if they are there coming to look for help and there is hope that their current life is more stable today, then we can help them be more intentional in the work that they do to manage their anxiety. And the part of anxiety I think that is so hard for many of our clients to understand is that sometimes it feels as if it comes out of nowhere, that the anxiety just pops up and they can't put a name to it. But because it's so familiar, their initial thought is to stuff it, like to try to push it away. And what I have learned myself, but also in working with clients, is that when we can attend to the anxiety through deep breaths, relaxation techniques, visualization, vagus nerve stimulation, mindful meditation, grounding exercises, we can help our systems re-regulate, to go from that heightened alert state to the rest and digest state. So reigniting our parasympathetic nervous system, this is something we can help our clients, one, understand the process, but two, bring in the practices, help them with those practices to allow them to feel more aligned without having to, they can acknowledge the anxiety is there and also acknowledge there are tools they can use to help them re-regulate. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term neuroplasticity, but basically it means that we can rewire our brains. Such an amazing thing. But for children who've experienced adverse childhood events, for people who have experienced trauma in their life, for women who experience both of those at a higher rate than men, those neural pathways that get created when we're anxious, that were created when we were children, where we go from feeling safe to feeling unsafe, or we stay in that highly activated fight, flight, freeze response. Those pathways are created through work, life, things that occur again and again. And because they're wired to react when stimulated by similar experiences, we can get stuck in familiar patterns, behaviors, responses, because those neural pathways are so well worn. Like you imagine a path through the jungle that migratory creatures, animals, create as they move through those paths time and time again over the years. Well, that's kind of like our brain. That is kind of like the neural pathways that get formed in our brain when there are raised voices and we instantly go to, oh my gosh, this isn't safe, or oh my gosh, what did I do? Why, how did I screw things up? Those neural pathways that get formed early on tend to keep us stuck in those same responses because they're so well worn. But the great news is that we can create new neural pathways. There it is. That's the amazing thing. We can create new neural pathways. And some of the ways that help us create those pathways and help us create a new groove for our brain to follow is mindfulness and mindful awareness and breath work, like things that help us, well, therapy too, right? There are strategies, exercises, practices that we can practice or help our clients learn how to practice so that new pathways are formed. And with every new experience, we're connecting new neural pathways together throughout our lifespan. So focused attention, aerobic exercise, novelty, emotional arousal can all promote neuroplasticity. So it's not just mindfulness, it's active engagement, fun, enjoyment, fulfillment, all of those things that we hope our clients are experiencing in their lives, new experiences, doing things throughout their lifetime, where that is helping them build those new neural pathways, but we can also help them actively create those new neural pathways as well. So, as I said, mindfulness promotes neuroplasticity, which is so cool. When we practice mindfulness and mindful meditations, we notice that thoughts come and go, where when we're anxious, we can get hyper-focused or ruminate or get stuck in those sort of familiar neural pathways. But as we practice mindfulness, we notice the thoughts come and go. And if we can allow those thoughts to come without reactivity and judgments, we are then teaching our brain to be with all of our experiences instead of reacting to them. So oftentimes, as an example, when our clients struggle with anxiety, there's often parts of them that want to make the anxiety go away, that feel like it's there all the time. So through mindfulness, through mindful awareness and mindful meditation, it helps our clients learn that, sure, the anxiety comes, but then it goes, that we can get triggered by a thought, and then the next moment we can feel better. We can feel sad, and then a little while later we're happy. So it helps our clients recognize that life is not static, that things come and go, including our thoughts, our emotions, and how we react to things. So we learn to, through mindfulness and through mindful meditation, we learn to respond instead of react. And those practices help build those neural pathways so that we respond more often instead of reacting more often. Does that mean we won't ever have, or your clients won't ever have a time where they are reactive and following those old neural pathways? No. But as we build new neural pathways, it helps us to find those pathways again and again and use those pathways again and again. And now this holds true for all of our clients, but for women who struggle with anxiety, this is particularly important. Because this 2009 meta-analysis showed that there's more negative affect. The negative affect is more predominant in anxious women versus men. So basically associating a negative attitude towards the anxiety. It's more often happens for women than men, like seeing their anxiety in a negative way and that creating negative emotions. Trait anxiety, which is when we worry about stress or worry about worrying, also more frequent for women. Women are also more likely to overestimate the possibility of danger, which then can activate our amygdala and our fight, flight, freeze response and our anxiety. And women expected harm and believed they wouldn't be able to cope if there was a dangerous situation more often as compared to men. So in many ways, women who struggle with anxiety are impacted more negatively, more deeply, and more often than men. In this 2011 study, they looked at girls and boys, so young girls and young boys. They found out that through this study that young girls worried more about worrying than boys. So again, that trait anxiety, worrying about worry. So if they were worried they were worrying too much, or worried if they were anxious, they were stressed that they, there was some reason, that the anxiety was bad. Girls were more likely than boys to feel that worrying was uncontrollable. So sort of tending to that, trending towards rumination, right? If we can't stop thinking about a thing, that feels like it controls us versus us controlling it. So this sense that they could not control their anxiety. And that girls used avoidance to try to stop the worry more often than boys. So avoidance, although it can be helpful if we find ways to put the anxiety away, but unfortunately it doesn't stay away. I'm sure with clients who use avoidance, to manage their anxiety, either by finding different things or being on their phone or streaming television or whatever it might be they use to avoid, the anxiety doesn't disappear. It comes back, it resurfaces. And that this, for girls, unfortunately, for girls, they more often would use avoidance strategies, but as we know, that doesn't take the anxiety away. In this 2009 study, it showed that women with generalized anxiety who responded to anxiety fearfully, so they had an anxiety sensitivity. They were sort of afraid of their anxiety, for lack of a better way to describe it. They were at a greater risk of an onset of reoccurrence of other anxiety disorders. So either onset or reoccurrence. So women who were afraid of anxiety, that could either mean their anxiety disorder would reoccur later, or they might have a co-occurrence of some other form of anxiety. So how can mindfulness help women who struggle with anxiety? One, it helps women bring a non-judgmental awareness to how their thoughts and feelings impact their emotional state. The practice guides women to let their thoughts come and go, reducing the rumination. It calms the nervous system. And it can also help to release the over-identification and active avoidance of anxious or worried thoughts. And so what do I mean by over-identification? Well, oftentimes when I'm sure you've heard clients say, I'm an anxious person, or trying to think of another example. But so basically, or I'm bipolar, right? So basically, those clients are over identifying with the mental health condition. So when someone sort of attaches meaning to their being about anxiety or whatever their mental health struggle is, it can sort of create a lasting effect where it's harder to heal and grow if we think this is just a part of us. So through mindfulness, it can help to release that over-identification, to then turn the page to saying, like, I struggle with anxiety, or I have anxiety versus I am anxiety, if that makes sense. So with mindfulness, clients can learn that when they're anxious or worrying in this moment, that it will pass. I think so to share a little bit about myself, I was a very anxious child, became an anxious adult. And the thing that meditation and mindfulness has helped me realize is that when I'm in that anxious state, it doesn't last forever. In the moment, it might feel bad, but it goes away. And other experiences help me recognize that life comes and goes. Anxious feelings and worrying come and go. They do pass. Just like happiness and joyfulness, it's not there all the time, but it's a balance. It moves in and out. Anyway, mindfulness is all about bringing a non-judgmental awareness to the present moment. So trying not to add to the anxiety by judging ourselves, by being critical. So instead of attaching negative values to the worries, like I shouldn't feel anxious or I hate my anxiety, the practice helps women accept and allow the feeling to be there without trying to avoid it, without attaching meaning to it, without making the worry about the anxiety cause more anxiety. So how can you help your clients by incorporating, how can you help your clients learn how to be more mindful, to practice mindful meditation? You can incorporate it into your session. So some of the prompts that you can use to help your clients focus attention on the anxiety in the moment, just to pause. If they're feeling anxious, if they're telling you they're feeling anxious, particularly in session, ask if it's okay to just notice that feeling, to focus their attention there, even closing their eyes and putting their hands on their body where they're feeling it, to really tune into their body, to notice what anxiety feels like for them inside. How do they know what anxious feels like? What is that sensation? And notice where they carry tension or painful sensations or just pain in their body. And you can ask them to explore if there were a color or a shape. Is there a temperature? Does it feel hot? Is it cold? Is it in your throat? Just really sort of building a picture of what that anxiety feels like and what they notice about it. And then have them breathe into that part of their body or into the sensations, if that makes sense to them. It could be like directing their breath as they inhale into their chest. Could they imagine the edges, like however the anxiety is presenting in their body? Say, for instance, it feels like a very heaviness on their chest. Could they imagine the edges of that sensation just softening just a little bit more? And just checking back in. How does it feel now? And if it feels worse, we can take a step back and say, which part of this exercise increased the anxiety? Which part of this didn't make it feel good? And maybe if it's just focusing on the anxiety itself, like could they create an abstract, sort of taking it outside themselves? Could you put it on a piece of paper and draw it versus like tuning too closely into their body? And most importantly for your clients, if you can bring a curious, non-judgmental attitude to the session to help and to mirror those responses for the client, so that they can, sort of, you can be the role model in bringing that non-judgmental attitude to session and to their anxiety. So asking questions like, what do you notice when you shift your attention to the anxiety? How do you feel towards your anxiety? Asking them to put a hand where they feel it, or just asking, how does it feel now? And being open to whatever their experience is, because maybe it might feel worse. It depends on your client, right? It may not help in the moment, but bringing your curiosity and just like, okay, so is there something your anxiety needs right now from us? Is there something we can do together for your anxiety? Or does it need something from you? And notice how you feel about these inquiries. Are there parts of you that feel uncomfortable? Are there parts of you that are maybe judging your client for feeling anxious about the things they feel anxious about? And really, you working with your parts to help your client work with theirs. So sometimes we need to demonstrate for our clients a breath awareness or a progressive relaxation, a mini meditation for our clients, so that they can experience with us and give you feedback in the moment. So let's do a little mini breath awareness, and we'll check back in when we're done. So getting yourself comfortable, putting yourself in a comfortable seated position, and just noticing your body here in the moment. You can leave your eyes open. You can close your eyes, whatever feels most comfortable for you. And we just want to tune into the breath. So as you're sitting here, intentionally take a slow, deep breath in and exhale out. And just notice how it felt to really allow that breath to go deep down into your belly. You can even try it again. And whether you breathe in and out through your nose or your mouth, it's all fine. There's no rules to this. Just taking a moment to be with our breath. And if at any time it feels uncomfortable, you can stop the practice, you can stand up and move. But if it feels okay to just stay with your breath as it flows in and out of your body. And just noticing as your chest rises and falls, or your belly expands and contracts. Just being with your breath, being here in this moment. If you find that your thoughts are thinking about what the next slide might be or planning the rest of your day, that's okay. Our minds do what our minds do. Our brains are made to think. But if we can just, each time we notice we get pulled away from the breath, just bring our attention back to the breath. And when you're ready, you can gently move your body in any way that feels good to you. Slowly opening your eyes and bringing your awareness back to the room, back to the space, back to the here and now. And if it feels okay, just notice how you as a clinician feel about this activity. Is this something you feel like you could demonstrate for your client? Or is this something that would help you feel more present for your client in a session or before a session? And if it feels all right, maybe take a moment, if you have a pen and paper nearby, just journal about your experience. And it's okay to pause this training for a few minutes if you want to take time to write about or process how this experience, how this breath awareness meditation was for you. All right, we're back. So some other mindful activities that you can do in session or suggest for your client to do out of session: guided imagery, grounding skills like noticing your feet on the ground or stepping outside without shoes on and putting your feet, in the grass or in the dirt. The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise. It's really tuning into your sensory experience. So 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can smell, 2 things you can touch, 1 thing you can taste. It doesn't have to be those particular senses with the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, but that's the idea, is just bringing your clients, helping your client bring their awareness to what's happening right here, right now. Gentle movement can help. Often with anxiety and being sort of stuck in our head, we can feel frozen. We can feel as if, your clients can feel as if they're stuck. So gentle movement can help sort of just bring them back to the present, to their body, to a sense of activity. Art is also super helpful, especially if they are working on kind of better identifying how their anxiety looks and feels. Art can be a great resource, as well as journaling, which is maybe what some of you just did. So bring your creativity to this, to bring these and other mindful activities into the session or into your client's awareness about how they can use these tools. So an important thing to take note of is trauma and mindfulness. So David Treleaven wrote the book Trauma Sensitive Mindfulness, and he notes that there are 3 areas where mindfulness is most helpful for trauma survivors. So bringing their attention to their regulation, body awareness, and emotional regulation. And for you as clinicians to check in before, during, and after any mindfulness practices, to let your clients know they can pause, they can open their eyes. If their eyes are closed, they can move around the room. They can do whatever they need to do to take care of themselves. Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to be re-triggering them. I'm going to go back to the slide that we just showed because I might have misspoken. So yes, so for trauma survivors, sometimes attention regulation can be difficult, right? Paying attention to the breath, sometimes focusing on the body can be super triggering if they were physically abused or physically traumatized, assaulted, whatever it might be. And emotional regulation for trauma survivors, sometimes that can feel somewhat shameful if they struggle with managing their emotional regulation. So it's being very sensitive to our clients' needs and honoring what they need in the moment and allowing them to inform us what they need. So mindfulness practices that focus on bodily sensations could be triggering, as I said, if they have a history of sexual abuse or physical trauma, physical assault. We want to be mindful that anything that's focusing deeply on bodily sensations could be difficult, could be hard for them. And we want to go slowly and use external clues. So instead of focusing inward, there are meditations you can do that focus on sound or color, or even using movement, like a walking meditation or walking mindfulness. All of these tools can help bring about a more mindful state without it having to be centered inward on the body. But we want you to empower your client to advocate for themselves with you in session during mindful activities, or if they've practiced mindful activities outside of session and, bring it back to you. And we want to work towards interpersonal connection before adding mindfulness, and maybe bringing in some additional trauma training if needed. So really honoring your client for where they are. So in summation, we got a few of these slides summarizing what's going on here. So if 1 in 3 women is experiencing anxiety, there's a good chance that you're working with a few anxious women, right? If your clientele population is mostly women or even partially women, chances are one of them has an anxiety disorder. And I apologize because here I wrote anxious women. You're working with a few women who have an anxiety disorder. So the combination of the societal, biological, and traumatic factors that impact women every day, that's a terrible sentence. So in summation, there is a combination of societal, biological, and traumatic factors that impact women every day. And this is something for you to just be aware of when you're working with women. Something else to be aware of is that women worry about women, worry about worrying. They ruminate. They ruminate more often than men, which can lead them to have a greater negative affect and feeling as if there's no control over the ruminations. They worry about the physical effects of anxiety. They also worry about the impact of stress. So, because of the societal, biological, and traumatic factors that are impacting women, they are worrying about worry. They are worrying about stress. And this is something for you to be aware of when you're working with clients that are female. Mindful meditation and mindfulness can help women get out of their heads and into the present moment. They can also help women feel more empowered to manage their anxiety outside of session. And it can create new neural pathways to help women feel calmer, even when they're in stressful events or when stressful events are happening. Therapy with mindfulness not only helps your female clients feel better, it can also impact their overall well-being because anxiety disorders impact women emotionally, physically, and financially. The prevalence and course and duration of anxiety disorders are a significant source of disability for women. So something we don't really talk about is how the impact of mental illness impacts even our financial state. So, that's not the slide I wanted. So many, sorry about that. So I'm gonna, Shit. Let's stop this. So not only do anxiety disorders and mental health conditions impact women and their well-being, it also impacts their pocketbook. It also impacts their financial stability. It impacts their daily life. So in a study done in 2011 by McLean and colleague, it stresses that the prevalence and course of duration of anxiety disorder are a significant source of disability for women. Women reported more missed days of work than men, women who had anxiety, more missed days of work than men, and they were seeking medical attention for non-mental health conditions than more often than women without an anxiety disorder. So more than half the cost of the medical care was non-mental health related expenses. So since women are more likely than men to have anxiety, they are also bearing most of the burden of the increased cost of the medical care associated with that anxiety. So I hope that you will take some of this into your work with your female clients, because I think it's impactful and I think it's important for us to be mindful and aware of where our clients are and what they need. Again, my name is Elizabeth Cush. I am licensed in Maryland and Delaware. My business is Progression Counseling. I am also, my other business is Elizabeth Cush Coaching, and I host the Awaken Your Wise Woman podcast, which initially the first few seasons of the podcast were called the Woman Warriors podcast. So it focused solely on anxiety and how to help women manage anxiety. But I would say the newer episodes are more on living a fulfilling life. But I hope you will check all those, check out the podcast, check out the other resources. I also have some meditations on Insight Timer for you and for your clients. So I hope you will see them there. If you have any questions, please reach out. My email is there, elizabethcush135@gmail.com.
I hope you enjoyed this continuing education course from Agents of Change. Want to earn your CE credits for this course? Visit agentsofchangetraining.com or the link in the description to purchase the course and take the post test. If you're looking for more CEs, check out our unlimited plan. You will get unlimited access to 150 plus ASWB and NBCC approved continuing education courses for one low annual fee. We're always adding new courses. Did I mention we also have 5 free CE credits available too? Check it out at agentsofchangetraining.com.